guarantee the future of our region through a sustainable region, through an intelligent border, and also through the financing of those projects that we all need, not only for the border, but for North America. So thank you, Calixto, and all of the people at NADB for the work that you constantly do. We know that, as Rodolfo was saying, we are living in a new era. USMCA ushered in a new era of North American integration. And if there's anything that we can pick from this first year, or a little bit more than first year of implementation of USMCA, is that North America integration is a fact, it's a reality, it's a necessity. And I think that it only shows how integrated our region is at so many different levels. At the trade level, it's true that USMCA has to consider an intervening factor, which is the pandemic. I mean, when we renegotiated NAFTA and when we launched USMCA on July 1st of 2020, we really did not expect a pandemic to be also in the middle of the road. And it is very true, I think, that having USMCA in place did offer a path to certainty, to a clarity in the sense that we know that we are undergoing very challenging situations. For example, having to close the borders, having to confine ourselves, having to have social distancing to be able to survive from a health perspective, but at the same time knowing that these measures were temporary, but long-term we had USMCA in place. We had to work very closely with our partners in the US and Canada to define how we were going to maintain our trade, our investment, our activities in place. We had to figure out what were essential activities, what's meant by essential activities, and how we could make sure that the disruption of value chains, which is a reality that we are living today, and it's very likely that we're going to be living with this disruption for some time still, that USMCA allowed us to have this roadmap for the integration in North America. The second thing that I'd like to share with you is that USMCA has allowed Mexico, the US, and Canada to deepen its already integrated value chains. As a result of USMCA, today Mexico is the #1 trading partner of the US. We have close to 15% of US trade with the world. We're the second export market for the US. We are the second source of imports to the US, and we maintain the first place. And the numbers are nice, but what the reality shows is that these numbers are evidently telling us that we are a region that produces together, that trades among ourselves, but that we are stronger together. USMCA makes us stronger partners, and by ourselves, I'm sure that we could hardly compete at the same level. So what USMCA tells us, and this is, to answer the question that Rodolfo posed at the beginning, what are the lessons of USMCA and what are the things that we can derive from this first year of USMCA is that integration is here to stay. The institution building that USMCA has allowed is extremely important, and it has really built in the three countries an institutional framework, an institutional mechanism that allows us to have a deep communication, that allows us to solve problems like the one we're facing today, which is basically the disruption of value chains, the social distances, the closing of borders. USMCA has allowed us to find ways to address these concerns, and also it gives us a path to to make sure that within this very disrupting context, we are in a position to continue to work together and to solve our problems together. Thank you, Rodolfo.
Thank you very much. And you provided with us with two very interesting insights. The first one is a trading partner, and the second one is that we are stronger together. And here, Mr. Ambassador Moctezuma, it's a pillar of that, the strongest within the relation between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. And in terms of that partnership, Gerald, what are your ambitions in terms of this first year anniversary, and what are your thoughts in terms of the improvements that we need to take together?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Well, it's my pleasure also to join the NADB, but also it's an honor and my pleasure to be at the podium here with my good friend, Dr. De La Mora, Subsecretaria, colleague of, I guess, of trade battles together. We work together. We won't say how many more years. I think I'm the senior member of this panel, right now. But that means that we've been engaged in this dialogue and discussion of North American integration, the value of partnering three countries and creating jobs and opportunities for all three countries. So, my role in, I guess, qualify, why am I here? I'm a banker, yes. I wake up every morning and I thank God that I live in Texas. And I thank God that I live in Laredo, Texas, especially because that's where I live, trade, North American trade every single day. So for me, the USMCA was an integral part, it's been an integral part of four decades for me. So I began working on trade being in Laredo. My office in Laredo oversees Interstate Highway 35. So I see all the cars and I see all the trucks. And right behind my building is the Kansas City Rail Yard. So I see all the trains bringing in goods back and forth. So I live it every day, and that's what I brought in being involved with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in the U.S. Mexico CEO dialogue, and the U.S. Mexico Economic Council, that I could tell the story of what trade really means for all of North America. So what I would do, and I had the fortune of being involved in the North American Free Trade Agreement negotiations back then. I was presiding over a border organization known as the Border Trade Alliance. And then now in the second round of USMCA, I was involved with the U.S. Chamber again in the privilege of working with our friends from Canada and Mexico and folks like at the end with the Subsecretaria. It's important for people to understand the role that we play, those of us that live on the border. I had a friend of mine from Canada described a visit when I invited him to Laredo, and he sat at the World Trade Bridge, El Puente Mundial, in Nuevo Laredo, where the bulk of the trade really crosses through Laredo, and we have two commercial bridges. But the World Trade Bridge is where it really impacts. If you stand at the World Trade Bridge at 4 o'clock on any day, and he said, it's like sitting at the 50-yard line of the Super Bowl of North America trade. Picture that. If you sit at el Puente Mundial de Laredo y Nuevo Laredo, World Trade Bridge, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, which one do you want to do it? Yolanda. And you see what trade is all about in these trucks that are bringing goods back and forth through a port like Laredo. And you can take that picture, but more than that, invite people to come to Laredo and Nuevo Laredo and see it for themselves. Seeing is believing, right? So I try to tell the story of what it means, basically to the small and medium enterprises, that's who we are at the border. I try to tell the story of the importance of the border and the integration, how we work together as sister cities. And in my presentation here, that I'd like to share with you all is the 4 basic points that we've talked about in our dialogue discussions that we hope now would be taken on in what now has become returned to the high-level economic dialogue, HLED, or el diálogo económico. So what we tried to do as part of our recommendations is, number one, and I'd like to put, if you could put up the next slide in the points, is that we need to understand clearly that we need to protect the integrity of USMCA. The implementation and the compliance of what was negotiated needs to be respected by all partners. Then we try to really focus on the importance that we need to understand the protocols involved in the negotiations, because when we talk about the economic impact, how we manage the process of those could be considered either created or uncreated, crises that we face. We could have, in our particular case, it happens to be health in this environment. But also it's important to understand that there may be some security or some natural disasters that may impact us, that we need to make sure that we're focused on how we react to those. The third point that I'd like to talk about is understanding that the USMCA is a framework agreement. It's not going to solve all the problems of the world. It is a framework agreement that must be respected, but it also needs to be a true priority of the national strategy of our countries. And it's got to be at the table. And finally, to me, the most important element is that for those of us, like Don Pedro Romero was saying, we that live and grew up on the border, that work every day on the border, that we see, we feel, we touch everything that is truly North America. It got there on a truck, it got there on a train, or it got there on a plane. And that supply chain needs to continue to flow as efficiently, as securely as we can. And we all are responsible for that. And that's an element that understanding that the border, we say, those of us on the border, we are really one city in two countries. And we need to understand that the integration of the role that we play on both sides of the border, our Mexico friends, our U.S. friends, and now our Canadian friends, that what unites us is what we live every day. And you can, if you don't feel the passion, then I will tell you, stay with me, and I'll talk more about it till you want me to. But it's important that also that Washington and Mexico City and Ottawa understand the role that we play on the border. So that's the message that I tried to deliver in all these opportunities, and I'm glad to join my colleagues in the panel. I've always pleasure of being, I learn so much from Dr. De La Mora every day, every time that we meet, because we're all working for the same objective. When we talk about the opportunities that North America brings to the table to compete, our competitiveness. When we talk about 33 chapters, 34, you want to have the summary, but you have chapter 26 on competitiveness. When you talk about what we bring in the new and improved version of what was the North American Accord, North American Free Trade Agreement, and we talk about customs and trade facilitation. We talk about services. We talk about the environment and labor now integrated with the agreement. These are folks that all of us that contributed to the dialogue had one objective: a stronger economy and a greater quality of life for all. And that's what I hope that through our dialogue and our discussions at the U.S. Chamber, working together with our private sector friends from Mexico. But more importantly, I will tell you this. As an American, North American that I am, and the discussions that I've been at the table, I find it somewhat disappointing that I have greater dialogue with our friends from the Mexican government, and they're open to listen to us small and medium enterprises from the U.S., that sometimes are their counterparts of the U.S. So kudos, thank you, really, to our friends in Mexico, the ambassador, Secretary de Economía Gutiérrez, they're willing to sit down and talk to us. So we, the border, need to do a better job of communicating to our friends in the U.S. and Washington that, hey, we have some common sense ideas, we have some good ideas, and we're willing to present common sense border management ideas to make sure that what we did in negotiating the USMCA is not disrupted, but continues to flow as effectively and efficiently. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Gerald. And you mentioned one of the most important things about the USMCA, and we are working the same objective. And one of those objectives are certainty, providing certainty to both nations, between Mexico, the US, and also Canada. And some of the main important things about certainty is legal certainty. And in your perspective, Jose Maria, what are you oversee the legal certainty arising of the USMCA?
Sure, Rodolfo, do you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to share some slides that precisely address that question in terms of how companies, and particularly the clients of the law firm in which I work, which is Cachot, Cavazos and Newton, these clients are posing questions and are really what we consider the real issues of implementation in the everyday life of our clients. Just to give you a quick introduction, we are a binational law firm, and I would say also bilingual and bicultural, a very NAFTA law firm born back in 1994, in which our founding partners envisioned precisely the need for specialized legal services for companies that would be willing to take advantage of NAFTA. Of course, our practices have evolved over the years. It's been over like a quarter century of existence of our firm. We have 8 offices in Mexico and 3 in Texas. And I can say that in the past few years, we have seen an increase in investment from Mexican individuals and companies into Texas, but also certainly many questions as to USMCA implementation. No? The 3 main areas have been, of course, labor, international trade, and energy. Next one, please. As to labor, well, as you might know, the International Labor Organization's Convention 095, which establishes the right to organize and collective bargaining, was adapted into Mexican law by the Mexican Congress as a preparation for USMCA. There was already some pressure as to updating that legislation in our country, and the main purpose was to homogenize the treatment for unions among the different USMCA parties. So I think that the most important feature in the labor chapter and regulations of USMCA as a new aspect compared to NAFTA is a rapid response mechanism. Mm-hmm. It's an approach to labor dispute settlement in free trade agreements, a totally new approach in which an ad hoc international panel can decide if in a specific facility complies or not with Mexican labor law. It is a controversial measure, but it's already there. And we know, this is public, that 2 processes have been filed under these regulations, particularly one by the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, Public Citizen, and the National Independent Union for Employees of Industries and Services, claiming that Tridonex, a Mexican automotive company, violated their employees' labor rights. And also there was an even more important case because it was filed by the U.S. State Representative alleging a violation by General Motors of its employees' rights to freely associate with any union and to collectively bargain. So we have not been involved in these cases, don't take me wrong. These are just cases that are there. But questions like these are raising, and our clients, particularly from the automotive industry, are coming with questions like this, along with many others that are like keeping them busy in terms of labor law in Mexico lately. For example, as to the outsourcing legislation. Now, the next one, please. In international trade, what we are seeing is that, well, USMCA maintained most of NAFTA's rules of origin, but there are important changes, and very important changes, I would say. Particularly the automotive industry and the origin procedures. So in the automotive industry, we have this conflicting interpretation of the roll-up provision. So how much we need to go back to determine the origin of a product. So the US has a position, Mexico and Canada have another position, and it's a matter of determining the different components of the vehicle and its regional value content. There's certainly a conflicting position there, and clients are coming asking about it. No? Aspects related are the core principle and complementary parts, as I was saying, labor value content, and also all the controversy around steel and aluminum purchases. And also we have new rules for certification of origin that really oblige companies to be more careful in terms of record keeping, in keeping their files as to all the purchases and going back to the value chain, really to have everything ready for eventually facing external audits. So that's what's going on in the international trade arena generally. And again, it's a matter also of adapting to USMCA because these are all new rules. And next one, please. So as you may have heard, we have an energy chapter in USMCA, but it is very limited and very focused only on recognizing Mexico's sovereignty on the hydrocarbons that are underground. That's nothing new. That's already in the Mexican Constitution. So really it was just, from my point of view, this chapter, a political statement that our hydrocarbons are ours and are going to be politically protected. Now, there are other provisions along the treaty that certainly apply to the energy sector. For example, the investor-state dispute settlement procedure for certain covered sectors, including oil and gas and power generation. This is important, and I will go to some details about that just quickly in the next slide. But just a little back, yeah. Quickly, Chapter 15 talks about general protections to foreign investment that are contained in many commercial treaties, and Chapter 22, restrictions on parties to discriminate in the relevant markets to benefit state-owned companies. And this is perhaps the most controversial part that is happening lately in the Mexico sector, because there could be grounds, and we can go to the next one, for certainly successful investor-state disputes based on recent regulatory and legislative changes that have occurred in Mexico. And generally speaking, of course, we need to go to analyze on a case-by-case basis. But unfortunately, what most of the times disencourages companies to go through these procedures is that they do not provide an injunction, so a suspension. So for example, if the electricity industry law favors CFE over other competitors in the generation market, just to put an example, companies prefer to go to an amparo lawsuit to obtain a suspension and not necessarily follow the long procedures that offer the international treaties. Also, as I was mentioning, usually they are long procedures, and that with that I would like to kind of conclude as per your question, Rodolfo. Legal certainty is certainly critical for the development of our North American market, and USMCA has some progress in terms of the ways to enforce its own provisions, And I think that in labor and environment, there has been very good progress. In energy, I think we are a step behind, and the procedures to enforce are still seen as something slow and that will not provide some immediate relief for affected companies. No? But in any case, I think that just we can finalize with this. I already talked about this. In any case, I think that in this kind of treaties, political will is critical from all the involved parties for the treaties to be a reality in terms of the actual business transactions occurring every day. So I know I went way longer than your question, but perfect. Jesse asked me to talk about kind of like how our clients are adapting, no, to USMCA.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that, Chema. And you mentioned a key word, and it's political willing. And here with the Ambassador Moctezuma and also the Undersecretary, we can attest that there is a good political willing. And I just read a month ago an article authored by you that was very interesting. You said, we understand that trade is one of the most important engines of growth for Mexico, and we need to take care of trade. We need to make sure that trade is responsive to the needs of the people. And I can kudos that, because if we don't put people at the center of the decision making in terms of political way, but also in terms of trade, it's crucial. In that regard, what are your ambitions in terms of trade? There is a lot of activity along the border, but trade continued to become a huge challenge. What are your ambitions in terms of that issue?
Yeah, thank you, Rodolfo. Well, and building up on what has already been said before, I think that, yeah, of course, trade is one of our most important engines of economic growth, not only for Mexico, but for the region. And this comes along with investment. And it's true that USMCA is a modernization of NAFTA, but also it's a completely new agreement that has new visions. And I think that to a certain extent, USMCA is a game changer, and it's an agreement that includes high standards for a number of areas in which probably we were not that aware, or probably we did not pay that much attention, even though they had some relationship with local communities, local economies, the environment, competition. I mean, you name it, it's there. No, USMCA is really broad and deep agreement that contains all sorts of provisions in a number of areas that affect our daily lives. I think that USMCA also reflects the fact that globalization is seen very differently today than what we saw in the 1990s, and the expectations are also very different. Why do I say this? In USMCA, for example, we have a chapter 25 for SMEs. It's not a binding chapter, but it is a chapter that pays specific attention to how we can make sure that all companies, no matter their size, within North America can have the opportunities to have access to the opportunities that USMCA offer. So in that sense, and Ruben is here, he was reminding me yesterday that in October we're going to have the USMCA SME dialogue here in San Antonio. And I think that that's also tells us about the kind of integration that we want to have in North America. We want to have a more inclusive region. In order for us to have a more inclusive region, we need to make sure that everyone who wants to be part of this success story can actually have the tools, has the information, and has the skills and the capacities to be part of that success story. I think it's also important to bear in mind that we have not only a larger scope of provisions and disciplines in USMCA, but we have a deeper integration in North America to the extent that we have integrated the digital economy. So we not only have a North American economy that's integrated, we have a North America digital economy that's integrating through technology, through the use of all sorts of mechanisms included in the agreement, through the legislation or through the legal provisions that are included in USMCA. So we're talking about a new layer of integration. And we're also talking about how we make sure that a social agenda is also part of North America integration. And we're talking about labor, we're talking about environment, we're talking about SMEs, we're talking about how we train people. We have a competitiveness chapter, which is also very important because it's giving us the roadmap for what kind of North America region we want. And as Mr. Pedro Romero was reminding us this morning, we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that North America is really the most competitive region in the world, not only because we won the #1 gold medal, but because that is what will translate into better standards of living for our people. So we know that we have a lot of work to do, but USMCA provides the kind of provisions that we can offer to our region in the medium and long term to make sure that we are a region that can offer prosperity to everyone in the region. And trade is an incredibly powerful tool to make that happen. So that's why we have to take care of it. We have to work for it, all of us, not only in government, but also in the private sector, academia, civil society. I want to say that USMCA also offers a number of forums for different people in civil society who are interested in participating to also have a voice. So I do see that USMCA, even though it was done in a very sort of forceful way, or sometimes it was very a very windy road, but at the end of the day, it took us to a place where we all wanted to be, which is we see ourselves as a stronger region because we can produce, we can work together. And I do think that we have a common vision. I do see that we share this vision that the three of us together are stronger. Challenges, there are many challenges. Obstacles that we will have to face, yes, there are too many obstacles at all levels. But I think that if we do not lose this vision, then USMCA will have made an incredible contribution to all of us in North America.
Thank you very much.
If I may add,
Yes.
I think what Dr. Alamora's comments hits a chord. One of the mistakes we made with NAFTA, those of us that were involved, when NAFTA was implemented, we all came back home. And yes, we worked. Those of us, that fought for it. And this time around, what we learned from that is that there has to be continuity. There has to be ongoing discussion. And so what we're doing through the U.S. Chamber and the U.S. Mexico Economic Council, we're creating a USMCA implementation scorecard so that we don't make that same mistake where we track and we monitor all of those chapters, those sectors that are critical, that we make sure that we maintain the integrity of the agreement and that we're involved in making sure that there's ongoing dialogue and discussion. And from the sidebars of that is what the opportunities of investment and opportunities for greater infrastructure for those of us on the border would create. The border, if we look at what we looked like on the border prior to NAFTA, we had unemployment rates of double digits, 17, 18%. Unemployment rates in Laredo, Texas, went down below 5%. Texas is a great beneficiary because Mexico is our number1 trading partner in Texas. Our CEO of the Texas Association of Business, Glenn Hammer, is sitting back there, and the TAB, the Texas Association of Business, has been an integral part of telling the story of how important Mexico is. But we've got to protect the USMCA. And we got to make sure that we stay engaged and have ongoing discussions that infrastructure projects are key for the process of supply chain. And bridges like Bridge 4-5 in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo, are an integral part of the success of the future. When we talk about, people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. There's so much truth in that saying, because we don't plan the infrastructure of the future, such as smart ports of entry processes, infrastructure projects, where the supply chain and the flow of commerce and goods and people as quickly and securely as possible. We need to focus, and Washington and Mexico City, I would hope, pay greater attention to the ideas that come out of the border, like Bridge 4-5, that is the future of maintaining the ports of our port, like Laredo is, of the future, and maintain our strength and our stability.
Thank you very much for that. And going deeper in that end, as all of we know, Chapter 24 of the USMCA have very specific regulations in terms of environment, and how we should comply with that environment terms. In terms of the compliance with environmental law between the three nations, what are your thoughts on that end, Jim?
Certainly, there has been a great progress in compared to the environmental contents of USMCA, particularly, again, as to the mechanisms for compliance with the rules by the different states that are members of the treaty. What I would perhaps would have missed or missed from the treaty is, but perhaps the political conditions were not there at that moment, was a more specific approach as to the energy transition, which is a reality, and it's occurring all over the world at different paces. And regarding that, I think that it's going to be critical to retake the conversation, for example, about energy infrastructure related to transmission lines, electric transmission lines. Imagine more cross-border transmission lines between Mexico and the United States. This was a conversation that we were having with clients like 3 or 4 years ago. U.S. companies, not huge companies, like normal companies, that were thinking about, okay, what if we build a transmission line that links a solar or wind power plant established in Texas and is directly interconnected and exclusively interconnected to Mexico? What would we need for that, and what would be, for example, the regulation regarding clean energy certificates? Okay, so questions like that. We're not receiving that kind of questions right now, and I hope we would, because that would mean that kind of projects are of interest in terms of precisely cross-border infrastructure, no? And transmission, I think, is particularly key for a successful energy transition, investment in transition. The Biden administration is certainly putting an accent in this in terms of helping the resource to be close to the demand, no? Solar and wind need to get to the load centers, and for that we need transmission. Hopefully we can see that in the near future also in Mexico, and that will certainly be a trigger for the energy transition.
On the environment, and it's, to me, that we tend to put that at the back burner of trade, because we think about, well, what's the environment have to do with trade? But really, Can you put up a slide? There was one slide in my presentation that showed a picture of the Rio Bravo. I don't know if you can go back, and the technical person can put a picture of. I want to show you a picture of the slide that I have showing you the Rio Bravo. And if you could, while I'm doing that, that point that I'd like to make in my presentation, to talk specifically of what the environment means for us on the border. You look at this picture right here. That's the Rio Bravo, the Rio Grande. Can somebody tell me if that picture was taken from the Mexican side of the river or the U.S. side of the river?
Who knows?
Looks the same, right? Is there a difference? Is the vegetation different in Mexico, different in the United States? Is the river that we drink our major source, our biggest asset? My mayor, Pete Saenz, is right here from Laredo, fighting for protecting our major source of water. And the environment is an integral part of our success of our border. So here, if you look at what the picture that I'm telling you right here, it's a beautiful river. Sunsets of the Rio Bravo, Rio Grande, are beautiful. You should come see it, about 6:30, más o menos. But the beauty about this is that when we talk to each other in Nuevo Laredo or in Tijuana, Reynosa, there is a value to be shared about who we are and what we look like. And we look the same. And we want to achieve the same. We want to protect our environment, but we also want to have a good quality of life. So, we have some ideas of what to do with our river, how to capitalize, where nothing that harms our river, is there. And the addition to that, I think the integration of what the environment meant. Some of you may or may not be aware that under the river there are some pipelines. When we talk about energy, and it became very vivid in Texas, and Glenn would agree with me, for Texas, that during the great, Nevada, the great storm, and what happened in there, it really put in perspective the relationship between Texas and Mexico and energy and the environment. Piedras Negras really, and manufacturing operations on the Mexican side, were highly dependent on Texas energy products. And what happened to us is that when the snowstorm, the governor of Texas, on February the 17th says we need to stop these Texas energy products, not leave the state of Texas. So wait a minute, but Mexico is very dependent on some of these products that are purchased with their contracts and their agreements, and they need to be respected. Our sister cities, our sister states that are creating jobs also need that energy. You cannot stop that, Governor. And luckily, working with all the diplomatic channels and the governor's office, 2 days later, those restrictions were lifted. Just like we want restrictions to be lifted about non-essential and essential travelers, on our border. To me, I hate that word non-essential. We're all essential. And we're all essential because those of us that live and work on the border are essential to the economies of the three countries too. So that's what the environment means to us. And these are two examples of the beauty of the Rio Grande and the Rio Bravo. It's just one example of what the environment means to us. And the NADB has been key and fundamentally created really as a result of that discussion. And I really congratulate you all. There's more to do. It's never enough. We'll never catch up. But the more we do together, the better.
Thank you very much for that. And I can oversee that the key word could be environment. And we can attest of the last board meeting at NatBank that environment was at the center of the main discussion. And in that regards, chapter 24 represents huge challenges in terms of how to do and how can we measure. And you mentioned about the scorecard between the TMIC and the implementation of the TMIC. But Undersecretary, what are your ambitions in terms of Chapter 24? And if you compare it between TMIC and USMCA, what do you oversee on that regards?
Well, thank you. Well, the environment is not really that new to the trade agenda. We have to remember that, for example, in 1989, we had a case, a very infamous case between Mexico and the U.S. on the tuna embargo that was based on environmental provisions. So I think that it's very important to bear in mind that when we're talking about trade, sometimes we try to solve many agendas using trade instruments, which is a discussion that has always been on the table of international trade and environmentalists. And I think it's a discussion that will continue to take place. However, I do think that today we are living different kinds of challenges. We have, to remember, for example, we have the Rio +20 conference, we have the Paris Agreement, we have the recently issued UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And that is telling us that the way we are doing things today is hardly sustainable. And trade is only one of the many instruments that we may be having to use to address these very key challenges and key questions. I mean, there's no doubt that whatever we do today will have an impact on the future. And we need to make sure that whatever policies we implement and whatever decisions we make are decisions that take into consideration all of the implications for the environment at all of its levels, all of its dimensions, which are huge. But when we talk about USMCA, I think that it's important to bear in mind that on one hand, we want to make sure that trade continues to be an instrument for growth, prosperity, development, integration, while at the same time we take into consideration other very relevant and real issues which have to do with how we do these things, no? And how do we trade, and what are the environmental implications. So it is sometimes it's seen as a dilemma. I don't think it's a dilemma. I think it's a wholesome question, and that's what we think. That's what I think we wanted to show in this Chapter 24. First of all, we are recognizing that the environment is part of the agreement. NAFTA had an environmental side agreement that I think had very positive results in terms of institution building. We had the North America Cooperation Commission, which is an institution that did a lot to create a North American environmental framework, which I think it's very positive, and we are building on it. We have the North American Development Bank, the Border Environmental Cooperation Commission, and we also have a new agreement that includes in the chapter that is part of USMCA a number of environmental agreements, multilateral environmental agreements, like, for example, the Montreal Protocol, CITES, and a few others, that are embedded in this agreement because it is recognized that they may have an impact on how trade and investment take place on these issues. For example, flora, fauna trade, to make sure that biodiversity is not affected because of illegal trading practices, etc. But I think it's also important to say that that Chapter 24 of USMCA is really forward-looking. It is the chapter that has probably the highest standards in terms of environment in any international trade agreement. It may be setting a model for future trade agreements, but it also responds to the reality of North America and to the kind of North America that we want to build. It's important also to bear in mind that we are respecting the legislation, the environmental legislation of each country, because obviously the three of us, we make North America, we make a region, but at the same time, we cannot underestimate the fact that we also have local challenges, and the domestic legislation has its own recognition within the agreement. And something that is also very important is, on one hand, the fact that this is part of the agreement, and that makes it provisions that are binding. What does that mean? Is that if we fail to have a pattern of non-compliance with our provision, with our environmental commitments, then we may have a consequence of having a sanction. We may have to go through a dispute settlement mechanism with some very serious consequences for the region. So that shows that the priority that the negotiators gave to this issue. And on the other hand, USMCA also opens a door for civil society participation. It opens the possibility for different stakeholders to have a voice at the table, to have some intelligence and expertise come to the table that before that we did not have. And one last thing that I'd like to mention is that even if environmental considerations may be responsibility of each one of the countries, the governments, the agencies, the environmental agencies, at the end of the day, it also shows that we need to work together to make sure that North American integration takes place in such a way that we can ensure that we have a sustainable region. I mean, USMCA will be worthless if we do not make sure that we have a sustainable region, an inclusive region, an innovative region that really creates the kind of region that we want to show that we care about the people and the place where we all work.
Thank you very much for that. And talking about Canada, Mexico, and US, we need to be aware that we share pretty much more than 2,000 miles at the border. We share more like this. We share pretty much $500 billion in trade. And in that trade, energy works in a very special way. And you mentioned, Jose Maria, a keyword in terms of energy transition. When we take a look on the USMCA and we understand the feeling of Chapter 24, but how that relates with Chapter 11 and Chapter 8. In terms of energy transition, what are your ambitions in the ways that the USMCA should be implemented and integrated?
Definitely, it's not a matter specifically addressed in the treaty, no? And that's what I was kind of mentioning before, that I was missing perhaps that even more specialized focus on energy transition, despite the progress that the Undersecretary very brilliantly described right now in terms of environmental compliance. But maybe it's USMCA 2.0, no? That in the next few years, if the conversation keeps growing and things evolve in both countries or in the three countries, maybe there's also something to talk about that at treaty level, no? But certainly the tools that the treaty offers to energy companies to protect their investments, for example, and I mean here particularly in solar and wind generation, they are there. The tools are there to be used. The dilemma is if the tools will be strong enough, if they will be timely, mainly in terms of what companies of this kind are expecting. But there could be extreme cases in which companies see their assets being lost due to some decision, and they would go to try to recover their investment. No? It's normal, and it should not scare anyone. It's just part of the implementation of a treaty. It's also the enforcement, the hard part of it. And doesn't matter. People learn from that, and it becomes a more than just words in a paper, but an actual tool of conduct between the parties. No?
Thanks for that. And let's try to conclude this amazing panel with one of the main words arising of all about the USMCA. And I just discussed that with Alejandro Landa, that it's a partner at the firm focused on finance. And you as a banker, you can oversee like that competitiveness. It's in the core in the decision making. What are your ambition in terms of competitiveness vis-a-vis the USMCA?
Well, for us as a banker, my customer base are SMEs. So my attention to the small and medium enterprises, which are, the custom brokers, the importer, the exporters, the trucking companies, both sides of the border. That's what I live off. That's what I focus. What impacts them impacts me. And that's what we as bankers, we tend to forget sometimes that we are economic developers. And therefore we should focus our attention in understanding the core nature of every one of our customers' business. So my attention is being placed in learning, constantly talking and having discussions with those small and medium enterprises. The big companies, with all due respect, they've got their economists, they've got their think tanks that they turn to, and we do. And from us, the value that these small companies bring to the table is something sometimes we just don't focus on. I'd rather have more of the smaller SMEs than the big, corporate America adds a lot of value, but small businesses is our lifeblood in our economy in the United States. And I tend to say, with all the challenges that we have with the beauty of USMCA, what we're living on the border, as I saw it earlier, the essential or non-essential, is impacting really our border life in a very negative manner. So a small business doesn't file for bankruptcy. It just disappears. A small restaurant just closes its doors. And where that cook or that manager or that waiter, their livelihood is gone when you create something that takes away what they've had perhaps for so many years. So these decisions that sometimes will come from Washington, and without having that dialogue and understanding of what impacts us, eventually is going to impact the entire economy. So for us on the border, those SMEs are the motels where the truck driver stays. Where does the truck driver eat? Okay? You don't think about those things. You think about perhaps the name of the truck, or perhaps the corporation that the goods are where they're coming from, Wisconsin or Kentucky or Dallas. I said, look, it's got to come to the border. And those are small enterprises. That's what I support. That's why I'm here, as trying to lend a voice of the importance of protecting those small businesses. And I finance them and I work with them. I've been very fortunate. I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be their banker. I don't mind saying it.
Rodolfo, we have time to open it up for 2 questions from the audience, so we can move to that.
Okay, please. Yes, that will be better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. I appreciate your comments. Extraordinary meeting today, extraordinary conference. So I would like to ask all of you, I think Jerry is probably more adapted to this type of environment and to answering the question, because it has to deal with banking itself. But what is your thought about, now we're talking about USMCA, right? So it's not NAFTA 2.0 anymore, it's a completely new agreement. What is the role that you think, and I'm sorry, but I didn't even say my name or the organization I represent. I'm Gustavo de la Fuente. I am the executive director of the San Diego-Tijuana Smart Border Coalition. So I like the fact that many people today have mentioned the word smart border. We do really have to create a smart border. That means many things, but The question is, what is the role that you see NADBank playing in this new environment? Do we go to NADBank 2.0, and what does that look like to you? What are the types of things that the bank should be improving or starting out? Where do you see that growth for this bank that is one of, I think, two very unique, truly binational institutions we have with CILA and IBWC on one side, and then this bank on the other? So,
sure, I think a great question. One of the things that I remember vividly traveling with then Mayor Nelson Wolff to visit with then President Carlos Salinas de Gortari when we were talking about, the NADBank being created back then, an idea that came out of Dr. Raul Hinojosa Ojeda from California. You may remember him. He had this idea, and at that time they were thinking about the NADBank being, in Los Angeles, because Congressman Esteban Torres was the congressman from LA wanting to have it created there, and Raul Hinojosa, I think, was at UCLA, but Mayor Nelson Wolff back then took a delegation, and I was asked to join him and to go visit President Salinas, and then Nelson Wolff said, "Why don't we do it in San Antonio?" And I said, "It's a natural, right?" So that bus ride between Los Pinos and back to the hotel was very instrumental, But the NADBank, the role initially as it was created, what I like today is that under the new capitalization, the scope of the NADBank has been expanded to include ports of entry and infrastructure. I think that's huge, huge. When you talk about a track record of what they were doing with border communities, but now looking at how you're willing to open up and have, consideration of expanding the scope. I think that's been one area that I really focus a lot of my attention on. So, congratulations. I think there's more to be done there, where we, the private banks, working together with the North American Development Bank and looking at what other areas we can work together on, and then work with both communities on both sides of the border, both sides of the country. Maybe broaden it beyond the border. We got to think out of the box. We got, just because we did this for 25 years doesn't mean we're going to have to continue to do it for the next 25 years. And it's there's a lot there to be learned. I'm an older guy. I'm an exhausted rooster. I say we need to get the young bloods and the young ideas, to come in and generate those ideas. To you all.
There is another question.
Okay, great event. I am Eduardo Ramos, consejero nacional de Coparmex. La pregunta es acerca de la integración de la economía verde. ¿Cómo se toma en cuenta la cultura? Es decir, que los que vivimos en la frontera, a veces decimos que es otra región diferente y a veces no nos entienden a 2,000 kilómetros de distancia al centro de México o tampoco a 2,000 millas que está Washington. Bueno, yo estoy en Ciudad Juárez. Entonces, en ocasiones tenemos que fundamentar bien, porque a veces piensan que es una zona privilegiada, porque estamos cerca de Estados Unidos, la parte mexicana, pero son retos igual que en otras regiones del país. Y creo que es una gran oportunidad para que esta región pueda, darse a conocer mejores prácticas tanto al interior de México como al interior de Estados Unidos. Es decir, que hay una ventaja el pertenecer México cerca de Estados Unidos, y creo que esto lo está aprovechando muy bien lo que es el NADBank y lo que son ejercicios como estos. Hay retos importantes en temas sociales, hay pobreza, hay mucha necesidad de desarrollo, y es importante que esto se vea que no beneficia únicamente a las clases más privilegiadas o menos afectadas, sino que cómo está beneficiando toda la parte. Y creo que el tema cultural es importante, sobre todo porque a veces las mismas personas aquí de Texas piensan diferente si son de Austin o de San Antonio, y mucho más cuando las distancias son más grandes. Ahora imagínate los de California con los de Texas, o los de Tamaulipas con los de Chihuahua, etcétera. No sé si se entendió mi pregunta. Gracias.
Well, I'll answer it this way. Uh, we have to constantly be educating Washington and Mexico City and Ottawa, really, of who we are. We're not a different planet on the border. Okay, we're in the same part of the world, and we need to invite our friends from government to make the laws to come to the border and not just put on a flag vest and get on a boat on the river like for us, or get on a truck, you know, with CBP or friends from Border Patrol. They're all great citizens and great neighbors, and start sitting down with the private sector at the table and talk about the culture, the environment, and the business benefits of working together. You know, take your chalecos off, get off the boat, get the photographers out of there, and let's get on the table. Let's talk business and how we can improve the quality of life of the border, which in turn becomes improvement in the quality of life of all North America.
Thank you. You want to add?
I couldn't agree more with what Dave was already saying. I think that, I mean, it's a very legitimate question and concern what you have exposed, Mr. Ramos. And I think that on one hand, well, of course, the work that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Moctezuma, and all of the consulates throughout the U.S., but also along the border, I think that they are very aware of the realities that we all have. With respect to the projects at the border and how we really make a shared border, I'd like to share with you, for example, we have the high-level economic dialogue between Mexico and the U.S. This is one of the main initiatives I think we have between Mexico and the U.S. to really deepen integration and to find and identify specific areas of need for our countries to be able to work together and create better conditions. One of the pillars of this high-level economic dialogue has to do with the border, not only infrastructure at the border, but very specific initiatives at the border. And I think that through those kinds of mechanisms, it is possible to really bring the attention of policymakers to the very specific challenges, but opportunities also that the border offers. And I am very optimistic about the agenda that we're developing. Ambassador Moctezuma is leading the effort on the Mexican side, and we are already working with our U.S. counterparts to build that agenda, but of course we're open to receiving any suggestions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that in mind, thank you very much for all attending this panel. We can conclude that it's clear that we are stronger together. As Ambassador Moctezuma says, the three nations are stronger together, and NADB, it's the engine that make the three nations work together. Thank you very much for everything, and Jesse, back to you.
Let's give a round of applause to the panelists, please. We're going to be transitioning for lunch in the next room over. Mayor Ron Nirenberg will be here in 5 minutes. He has to start as quickly as possible because he has a phone call at 1:30 with President Biden. So if we can please move over to the next room and please take a seat as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Yeah, I see it in the middle.
Okay.
Over there.
Vamos a empezar, no, yo creo que van a empezar hablando ya de ellos. Y ya sería lo
We're very excited to have been joined by three very high-level officials at today's keynote luncheon. I'm going to start with Mayor Nuremberg, and then we're going to move to Congressman Joaquin Castro, and then we have a video from Senator Alex Padilla from California. The Honorable Ron Nuremberg, who is our mayor here in San Antonio, which has the 7th largest population in the United States and is one of the nation's fastest growing cities. First elected in 2017, Mayor Nuremberg was re-elected to a third term just a few months ago on May 1st. In an effort to combat the efforts of global climate change, Mayor Nuremberg spearheaded a climate action and adaptation plan, which will be the focus of this conversation today. Shortly thereafter, Mayor Nuremberg joined the Climate Mayor Steering Committee, a group of 24 mayors who serve as a leading voice in efforts to further climate action in more than 400 cities across the United States. GRIP, a nonprofit media organization named Mayor Nuremberg one of GRIP's 50 in 2020, recognizing him as an emerging leader in climate change in the United States. He has also been called a climate mayor. Mayor Nuremberg also hosted the U.S. Mexico Border Mayors Association here in San Antonio.
Good afternoon. It's great to see all of you today, and I'm honored to be here with you. I understand my friend Mayor Stein is here. I don't see you, Mayor Stein, but you're out there somewhere under a mask. I want to say welcome, Mayor Pete to San Antonio as well. I do want to thank Calixto Mateo as well, John Beckman, and Salvador Lopez, the management team of the North American Development Bank, for hosting the U.S. Mexico Border Environmental Forum in our great city and allowing me the opportunity to speak about our climate action plan here in San Antonio. It's first important to acknowledge the tremendous efforts of NADB, which in 1994 opened its doors a half a block from here in the city's International Center. It's been suggested that NADB is in fact the first green bank ever. Love the green lights here. To date, NADB has developed and financed 280 environmental infrastructure projects along the border, which has helped improve the quality of life of more than 18.5 million residents along the U.S. Mexico border. The bank staff, which is made up of a binational group of financial and technical experts, certainly helps add to the international flavor of our great community. And here in San Antonio, we're committed to acting on climate change, the greatest existential crisis of our time. When it comes to climate action and adaptation, our borders do not stop at the city limits or the county line. Working with partners across jurisdictional boundaries is essential to staving off the worst impacts of climate change, including extreme weather events that overwhelm our infrastructure and burden our frontline communities. In our climate plan here in San Antonio, which in short order you will hear from our Chief Sustainability Officer, Doug Melnick, it's one of the first initiatives I endorsed as mayor. In our climate action and adaptation plan, we draw on best practices and policies to improve and innovate the ways we build, how we power our homes and businesses, how we travel, and how we regenerate the natural resources that allow us to thrive. Since adopting the plan, we've developed partnerships and unique funding agreements to advance vehicle electrification and energy efficiency improvements in buildings throughout our greater community. This is not a small feat for a city who is 300 years old. We're also leading by example as we continually improve our own municipal facilities, our libraries, our community centers, our police stations, and begin transitioning our own fleet to fully electrified vehicles. But perhaps most importantly, we are educating and empowering our employees, our youth, our vulnerable residents, and everyone who works and lives in San Antonio about climate change and ways we can work together to ensure quality of life. As we we recognized from the very start in 2017, it's not simply enough to have a policy on paper. You have to implement it. To implement it, you have to understand the community. To understand the community, you have to look at those who would be impacted most by the policies that you would put forward. So we're very proud that our climate plan is one of the first in the nation to consider climate justice and economic justice as the foundation of the climate and adaptation strategy. At the city level, we're fortunate to be able to build on healthy relationships with our North American neighbors of Canada and Mexico to strengthen economic development. With our collective assets, these three countries can pave the way in investing in the green economy, minimizing risk, and leveraging opportunities that take a global perspective for health of the planet that we want to save. I'm very grateful and pleased that we have Congressman Joaquin Castro here, who is supportive of these efforts at the local and international level. We're delighted that he's here to provide a green infrastructure update from Capitol Hill as well. So thank you very much, Congressman, for being here. Lastly, I would like to leave you with this. As I asked my Chief Sustainability Officer, who is really the driving engine behind our sustainability work here in San Antonio and the implementation of our Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, I will leave you with this thought. San Antonio is an old city. We're a city of history and a legacy of conflict and of triumph. We are also a city that is rich in natural resources, which at varying times in our history have been exploited. We know that we are also a city in the midst of an energy transformation, and it's no small fact that we are on the doorstep of one of the largest oil reserves in the entire world. So if in San Antonio, Texas, in the heart of South Texas, we can pass and begin to implement a climate action and adaptation plan that meets the stringent requirements of a world treaty, the Paris Climate Accord, which we are committed to, then these kinds of strategies can be adopted and implemented anywhere in the world. So from that perspective, I look forward to the leadership in our city and the partnership with our state and federal government partners, along with our international community. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you today. Thank you very much. Sure. I have a brief moment to take a few questions, and then I'm going to pass it on to take the really tough questions to our Chief Sustainability Officer, Doug Miller. So if you can keep the technical questions to about a sophomore level, I'll pass off the higher courses to Doug. So I'm happy to take some questions. If there are none, I'll consider the copies. Yes, ma'am.
Lo mencioné hace un momento que estuve involucrada en la elaboración de nuestro plan de acción climática en Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua. A mí me gustaría que pudiera de alguna forma compartirnos lo que piensan Antonio les ha mencionado de una manera efectiva para poder promover la implementación en nuestra ciudad.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and we are close partners with all of our boards, mayors, and municipalities. And so, to that is what it is. We are in close discussions with two partners in El Paso. So we would look forward to an opportunity to exchange our best practices, learn what we're learning there at Juarez, and see how we can also impact the positively and vice versa. So look forward to connecting. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Mission accomplished. Well, moving right along with the program, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our next keynote speaker, Carmen Joaquin Castro. Carmen Castro has worked hard to achieve the opportunities created by the sacrifices of his grandmother and prior generations. After finishing high school a year early, Joaquin left San Antonio to graduate with honors from Stanford University in 1996. Congressman, I might add that Jalisco and Salvador are both Stanford University graduates as well. He then went on to Harvard Law School where he received his JD in 2000, and upon returning to San Antonio, he was 28 years old, going private law practice, and was elected to the Texas legislature. There he served 5 terms until 2012, where he was elected to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives as a representative of Texas' 20th congressional district, which covers a large portion of San Antonio and Bexar County. Having experienced America's problems firsthand, Joaquin wants to help build out what he calls the infrastructure of opportunity, so that future generations will have the same chance to pursue their American dreams. Congressman Castro believes just as there is an infrastructure of transportation that helps us to get where we want to go on the road, there's an infrastructure of opportunity that helps Americans get to where they want to go in life. It is that infrastructure of opportunity, great public schools, universities, healthcare, good paying jobs, and environments that enables Americans to pursue their American dreams. We are honored to have Congressman Joaquin Castro as our guest to highlight his work in Washington, D.C. and Nevada and Congress.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's very hard work. And environmental project in Mexico, also, a big thank you. The climate action plan that you spoke of is a smart blueprint to make real progress in our community. And I also want to thank NADB's leadership, including Managing Director Felicio Mateo Chanel, and the entire board of directors, made up of representatives from both the governments of the United States and Mexico. And I'm here with an update and hopefully with some good news in the months and years to come about infrastructure that I think will have a direct impact on the work that NADB does and the work that most of you do. As you know, Congress is working on a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure. I don't have to tell you over here that we follow the report card, the engineers who put it out annually, about America's challenges in infrastructure. Everything from roads, streets, highways, to bridges. Our infrastructure.
So we need not only to repair roads and bridges, but to truly transform our nation. This is an opportunity to do that. It's an opportunity to do as President Biden says, which is to build back better. And as y'all know, investing in infrastructure will create well-paying jobs, improve our global competitiveness, tackle the climate crisis, and build an economy that's stronger, fairer, and more sustainable for future generations. The bipartisan infrastructure deal that was recently approved by the United States Senate makes a few key investments. For example, it makes the largest federal investment in public transit in the United States history, which mostly vehicle-dependent San Antonio desperately needs. In other words, we need not only transportation on roads and streets and highways, but we also very badly need public transportation. It makes the single largest investment in our nation's bridges since the construction of the interstate highway system decades ago. It repairs our airports and waterways to improve U.S. competitiveness in the global economy, which of course will also have a benefit for Mexico. It reconnects Black and Latino communities that were intentionally divided by transportation policies in generations past. It ensures every family can access high-speed internet to help bridge the digital divide. Internet in the 21st century is no longer a luxury, but a necessity for day-to-day life. It builds a national network of electric vehicle chargers to help us start to transition to a future with many more electric vehicles. It invests in electric school buses nationwide. It replaces lead pipes and secures clean drinking water, so no matter where you live, in rural towns or in urban communities, you won't be poisoned by dangerous chemicals. We all recall the still ongoing challenge in Flint, Michigan, for example, of the danger of poisoned water for communities. It also invests in water infrastructure and flood control, so our neighborhoods here on the west side of San Antonio and other cities across the country won't get flooded every time there's a hard rain. You know that this has been a particular problem in the colonias of South Texas, in the communities throughout South Texas, and also in many communities in Mexico as well. It also updates our electric grid and invests in clean energy transmission. And Texans, of course, will never forget the winter power outages not too long ago in which over 700 Texans perished. I serve on the House Foreign Affairs and Intelligence Committees in Congress, and part of my work includes the United States engagement in international organizations and institutions such as NADB and also the World Health Organization, the United Nations. In fact, I'm the subcommittee chair for the committee that deals with that work. And 2 weeks ago, the UN reported what Texans are already experiencing. Climate change is a real crisis for us. Extreme weather events like the winter storms this past February will only grow stronger and more frequent. Devastating storms and flooding like Hurricane Harvey in Houston, as you all recall, I'm sure. Severe heat and droughts are becoming more frequent throughout our state and our region. And the climate crisis is here. The only question is, how will we respond to stop it from getting worse? The answer is to invest in infrastructure, clean, resilient, sustainable infrastructure. People in Washington, quite frankly, have been talking about investing in infrastructure for generations. And now we're finally on the cusp of actually getting it done. Today, infrastructure means serious business. It also means great paying jobs for people. Unfortunately, we squandered the last several years talking about building a wall between the United States and Mexico, rather than spending much of that energy, time, and money building things that bring us together and benefit both of our nations. But now, President Biden and this Congress are focused on rebuilding the United States of America, including more resilient infrastructure right here in San Antonio and throughout South Texas and in border communities. And infrastructure is not only physical infrastructure, remember, like roads and bridges that help you get from one point to the next. One of America's greatest strengths is that over the generations, we've had an infrastructure of opportunity that helps you get to where you want to go in life. So just as we've had an infrastructure of transportation, the United States has built out an infrastructure of opportunity that helps Americans get to where they want to go in their own lives. I'm talking about things like public education, workforce training, affordable health care, and good paying jobs. But over the years, America's infrastructure of opportunity, just like our roads and bridges, has started to crumble in places. And in the worst examples, started to fall apart such that people have fallen through the cracks en masse. Congress is working on major investments through this bill that reflect our values and rebuild the middle class. We know that students deserve pre-K and 2 years of free community college. I should say the infrastructure bill, but also corollary legislation. Parents deserve affordable child and elder care for their families. Working people who spend all day at the job deserve lower prescription drug costs and paid family medical leave. Essential workers who were the heroes during this pandemic. These are people that didn't have the option of working from home the way I did and other members of Congress and so many professionals. These essential workers who powered our economy during COVID deserve a pathway to citizenship so that they can fully participate in American life. Working families deserve a tax cut to help with the ever-rising costs of raising a family. Older Americans deserve Medicare that includes dental, vision, and hearing benefits. And it's long past time that in Texas and a handful of other states, we expand Medicare for everyone we expand Medicaid for everyone who is eligible in this state, and that the United States Congress move us closer towards universal health care coverage for every single American. And communities deserve clean air and water and economic development that doesn't jeopardize our environment. Now is the moment to invest and update America's infrastructure of opportunity for the 21st century. Next week, in fact, the House of Representatives will take up a budget resolution that will reimagine and transform the United States infrastructure of opportunity. And that's a big deal for San Antonio, for South Texas, for the communities that most of us work in. It's our chance to not only rebuild from COVID, but to build it back better. It's also our chance to show that our democracy can deliver for our people. It's our chance to show the American people and the world that the United States can still, in fact, do big things. And that was the spirit that first created the North American Development Bank, established by the governments of both the United States and Mexico to improve the quality of life for people living along the U.S. Mexico border. And for nearly 3 decades, NADB has worked hard to address environmental challenges and support sustainable infrastructure. It's incredibly important work, particularly with the accelerating climate crisis. And most of all, your work is a fantastic example of how bilateral cooperation can help us solve big problems. I want to wish you the very best of luck in the coming months and the coming years. Please know that I'm here to support your work and at your disposal, and that I believe that the United States Congress and the President of the United States and partnerships like this will help us deliver a brighter future for the people of both the United States and Mexico in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Well, let's take a couple minutes to eat, enjoy our food, and then we'll listen to the video with the message from Senator Padilla. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Senator Alex Padilla, and I have the honor of representing California in the United States Senate. I want to thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm honored to join this forum in its 25th year of jumpstarting conversations and policymaking on environmental issues. As we face the climate crisis, our need to collaborate across borders is more urgent than ever. Climate change is an existential threat to the entire planet. State and national borders can't stop pollution, can't stop drought, can't stop wildfires. That's why we all need to work together and partner with the private sector to create a more sustainable economy. I'm proud to support President Biden's ambitious climate agenda, which will set the United States on the path to 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2035. But to meet that goal, sustainability must be integral to all policymaking. That's especially true as we revitalize America's infrastructure, from our roads to our power grids. Earlier this year, I worked with Senator Feinstein to introduce the Border Water Quality Restoration and Protection Act. This legislation would reduce pollution along the United States-Mexico border and improve the water quality of the Tijuana and New rivers. For too long, failing sewage and stormwater infrastructure in Mexico has allowed toxic waste to flow across the border into Southern California. This pollution enters the air and water and deprives border communities of recreation and other economic opportunities. Our bill directs the EPA to take the lead in developing a solution with federal, state, and local partners to address the environmental and public health crisis caused by cross-border pollution. The border between California and Mexico is the busiest international crossing in the Western Hemisphere, creating hundreds of billions of dollars in economic activity each year. So improving our border infrastructure can help strengthen that trade relationship while also reducing its environmental impact. I'm proud to support binational projects like the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry, which will reduce wait times for commercial vehicles at the border by an estimated 1 to 2 hours on average. This project will make business more efficient and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of idling vehicles, which harm air quality and contribute to climate change on both sides of the border. I also voted to pass a $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill to invest in much needed projects like this. Now, this bill will send billions of dollars to improve infrastructure for drinking water, wastewater, public transportation, electric vehicles, and more. This initial package is an important step forward to rebuild America's infrastructure and create millions of good-paying jobs. But in order to succeed in the 21st century, we need to do even more. We need to invest in transformational programs that improve lives, combat the climate crisis, and strengthen our economy at the same time. I'm working with my colleagues to pass a second infrastructure bill that will address the climate crisis at the scale that we need. Through the budget reconciliation process, we will deliver on the bold agenda of President Biden's American Jobs and Families plans. We will rebuild America's leadership on sustainability, a proud tradition in California. And we will work together to build a stronger and more equitable economy for all.
Well, that's a heck of a lunch. I mean, to have the mayor of the 7th largest city in the country, a U.S. congressman, and the senator from California. So we're going to continue this. We have about 30 minutes. Please eat, take your time, network. We'll start the program back up at 2 o'clock in the next room, and we'll be running a little bit early with the mobility and urban development panel. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for joining us after lunch. I know it's always a tough spot to be in. I know folks are trickling in and out, but to try to keep everything on time. I'm going to introduce John Beckham, our Deputy Managing Director of the North American Development Bank, and he will introduce the panelists. We almost started without the freight shuttle, but the freight shuttle did arrive on time. So thanks, Steve, for being here on time. John Beckham was appointed North American Development Bank by the Board of Directors on November 12th, 2020 as the Deputy Managing Director. He started his 4-year term on January 16th, which happens to be my birthday, so that's a good sign. Under the direction of the Board of Directors and reporting to the Managing Director, the Deputy Managing Director is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the bank, including general staff management, assist in the development and implementation of environmental infrastructure projects and programs, contact with the U.S. and Mexican board members, financial and budgetary oversight, performance measurements, as well as collaboration with border stakeholders, which he will be doing today. John brings more than 20 years of experience to the bank. We're very lucky to have him. A graduate of University of Notre Dame and an MBA from Ohio State. Has lived in Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. So, John, with that, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jesse, and thanks for everybody who forwent their siesta to listen to our conversation today. And I promise it's going to be very interesting and hopefully engaging. Our topic today is mobility and urban planning, specifically as it relates to the border region, but also in general is one of the themes that came out earlier is that Mayor Nuremberg mentioned is the border region can actually show a demonstrative effect to all other communities about how it can engage in sustainable environmental, social investment through infrastructure. One of the key things we thought about here at the North American Development Bank when we were trying to design these panel discussions was two big trends that have been mentioned today in this morning that you all know if you live in the border region. There's tremendous population growth and there's tremendous economic opportunity and growth throughout the border region from the mouth of the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, all the way over to the Pacific Ocean. And that's all a great story, but it creates new challenges and new opportunities, especially in the areas of water, air quality, green economy, and within that sphere, we thought mobility and transportation and how can you manage this growth so that it's more sustainable, uses the resources of the region more efficiently, and can provide that a foundation for that growth going forward. I think the panelists here you have before you bring an array of expertise and perspectives to these challenges that hopefully will create a lively conversation amongst us here on the panel and then amongst you all later on. As hopefully you all are aware of by now, at NADB we're very focused on investing for an improved air quality, a greener economy, and economic opportunity. And we believe all three of those things are integrated and mutually beneficial and reinforcing of each other. So to get us thinking about this, I'm going to kick it off to the panel and I'm going to stop talking because other than not riding my bike so well, I know very little about transportation. So the first panelist is on my right here, Rogelio Rivero. He's Director General of the Secretaría de Comunicaciones y Transportes. That's the Secretariat for Communication and Transportation within Mexico. He has deep and broad experience in transportation, working there. In addition, he has experience with public-private partnerships, having worked in the Ministry of Hacienda and public credit in Mexico at the federal level. And he also has investment banking experience working with Nacional Financiera, which is the Federal National Development Bank. So, Rogelio, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Please receive greetings from the Ministry and the Jorge Arganis Diaz Leal and by the Deputy Minister Jorge Nuño Lara. Well, the work that the Ministry develops in Mexico about concessions, about PPPs, are expressed to face the scarcity in fiscal resources. For example, we will show the budget, the budget, the no budget projects that are involved in the next presentation. Firstly, the border crosses and the international bridges that develops in Mexico are related in the present list. The conclusion of the Puerta Mexico, conclusion of the second pond of Ojinaga Presidio Bridge, the beginning, yesterday, beginning of construction of Avenida de las Américas in the Bosville Matamoros Bridge, International Bridge. The executive project in the second pond of Reynosa Far Bridge, International Bridge. The conclusion of the executive project in the Rio Bravo Dona Bridge, International Bridge, and the recent sync of understanding memorandum of Otay Mesa II. This main effort is draw the Otay Mesa II that involves an investment amount around to $100 billion. This understanding memorandum thing reflects the efforts of the Mexican government and the entities like Ministry of Communication and Transports, Fiscal Agency, CRE, and Caltrans and SANDAC present with us today. So in order to enhance the USMCA agreement, trade agreement, we developed a highway to join Monterrey, Nuevo Laredo, to another highway, another great project is Pátzcuaro-Uruapan in Michoacán. The conclusion of the Coatzacoalcos-Salina Cruz between the Tehuantepec, Istmo de Tehuantepec, and the bypass Ciudad Juárez in the north, even the country. These projects are created to enhance the USMCA trade agreement and to develop the private investment forces in Mexico. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rogelio. Our other panelist is Guadalupe Peñunuri. She's the Director General of the Municipal Institute for Planning and Development of Hermosillo in Sonora, Mexico. She describes herself as an architect by profession and an urban activist by conviction. She also teaches at the Tech of Monterrey. She's president of the College of Architecture or the Collegiality of the Architectures in Hermosillo and the Association of Municipal Planning of Mexico. So with that, I'll turn it over to Guadalupe.
Thanks, Lupita. It's okay.
Thanks a lot, Calixto, NADB for this invitation. NADB is the greatest ally that Hermosillo have, and thank you very much. Well, this was my part in English. The next will be in Spanish. It's much better. Muchísimas gracias. Y bueno, la verdad es que mi experiencia, más que nada, pues es la del desarrollo urbano y también la de la movilidad. Y también ahora estamos como Implan tratando de buscar una nueva manera también de salir de esta crisis, no solamente la de salud, sino también la económica, pero bajo nuevos modelos económicos. Hay una palabra que yo aún no he escuchado en este foro, quizá la vamos a escuchar después, y que se llama economía circular. Y es algo en lo que también estamos incursionando y queremos poner el ejemplo, por lo menos en México. Por eso le llamé a esta plática soluciones inteligentes para un clima cambiante, porque todo lo que hacemos también tenemos en mente la gran preocupación de la gran crisis mundial, que es la crisis climática. Y cuando hablamos de movilidad, nos preguntaban cuáles eran los mayores retos que tenemos. Y hay un reto que compartimos tanto las ciudades en Estados Unidos como las de México. Muy bajas densidades y usos de suelo monofuncionales. Si hablamos de movilidad y queremos realmente resolverlos y no solamente atacar los síntomas y no solamente atender lo urgente, tenemos que trabajar con las densidades de nuestras ciudades y con los usos de suelo también de nuestras ciudades. Es la única manera en que lo hagamos. Movilidad, les voy a dar, todos tenemos diferentes definiciones. Para mí es el precio que pagamos por una mala accesibilidad en nuestras ciudades. En realidad yo a veces doy clases en el Tecnológico de Monterrey y le pregunto a mis alumnos, ¿cuál es la mejor solución en la movilidad? Y al que me lo responda lo voy a exentar. Todo el mundo responde, la bicicleta, el transporte público. La respuesta es no. La mejor solución a la movilidad es no necesitarla. Y la única manera de hacerlo es trabajando con estos dos últimos factores. Y bueno, algo, y ahorita decía que NADBank es el gran aliado de Hermosillo, con ellos hicimos el plan de acción para Hermosillo, en el cual estudiamos los diferentes escenarios tendenciales al 2050. Y esto no se diferencia mucho de muchas ciudades en Estados Unidos también, y ni se diga en México. El que ven ustedes a la izquierda es el escenario tendencial, el de business as usual, si continuamos con la expansión urbana de baja densidad. Y vean allá abajo, ese tema lo entienden muy bien los bancos, cuánto nos cuesta eso en infraestructura. Y eso no es nada comparado a lo que nos cuesta después mantenerla. En el de en medio vemos un escenario intermedio, en donde hacemos la ciudad más compacta, limitamos esa expansión urbana, y empezamos a incorporar algunas soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Baja notablemente la inversión en infraestructura. Y hay un tercer escenario, que es el escenario óptimo, donde realmente hacemos una ciudad más compacta, más densa, pero utilizamos la infraestructura verde como infraestructura polifuncional en lugar de utilizar la actual infraestructura gris. Ese es el escenario más barato en infraestructura y créanme, va a ser mucho más barato aún para mantenerlo. Nuestras ciudades en México están quebradas en toda la extensión de la palabra porque no podemos mantener las infraestructuras existentes. Ha sido demasiada la expansión y no va relacionada con el crecimiento poblacional. Pero no solamente es lo que nos cuesta en términos económicos, es también lo que nos cuesta en términos ambientales. En Hermosillo, ese es nuestro inventario de gases de efecto invernadero, y si ven, lo que es la movilidad ocupa la mayor parte de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, solamente seguido por lo que es la energía en la industria, que ya si lo sumamos a los de los procesos, ahora sí, la industria se convierte quizá en el emisor número 1. Eso es lo que queremos cambiar también con la economía circular. Dejar ese paradigma de la economía lineal y pasar ahora a una circularidad en la economía que no es un green watch, como le llaman simplemente, o responsabilidad social corporativa, es responsabilidad social competitiva, porque realmente puede ser una nueva fuente de empleos verdes y una mayor competitividad para nuestras ciudades. Y la pregunta es, en nuestras ciudades, tanto del norte de México como del sur de Estados Unidos, ¿existe un futuro más allá del automóvil? ¿Realmente podríamos cambiar nuestra movilidad y movernos hacia una movilidad más sustentable? La respuesta es que hay que trabajar en varios ámbitos. Por parte de nosotros como gobierno, lo que nos corresponde es hacer un nuevo tipo de infraestructura en nuestras ciudades, básicamente lo que se les conoce como calles completas, y que nosotros le añadimos un último factor que le llamamos la infraestructura verde, algo con lo que también trabajamos con NADBank y creamos el primer manual de lineamientos de diseño de infraestructura verde para municipios mexicanos. Y hoy les comento, Calixto, que estamos asesorando a la ciudad de Buenos Aires Estamos asesorando el Ministerio de Desarrollo Urbano de Colombia y el de Chile, en base al manual precisamente que se realizó gracias al apoyo que tuvimos con ustedes. Lo único que nos falta es que se empiece a practicar más en México, ¿no? Pero bueno, ahí vamos ya. A veces es bueno que nos llegue desde afuera para empezar a desarrollarlo en nuestro país. Y bueno, también hay que trabajar mucho con la psicología de las personas. Por eso, por ejemplo, hemos utilizado la tecnología, creamos esta plataforma que se llama Ruedo Contigo, porque al hacer preguntas de por qué no usaba más, por ejemplo, la bicicleta, y es porque las personas no se sienten seguras, pero por falta de experiencia en muchas ocasiones, además de la falta de infraestructura en la cual estamos trabajando, ¿no? Entonces creamos esta plataforma que se llama Ruedo Contigo, donde ciclistas experimentados ayudan a no experimentados. Es un BlaBlaCar de la bicicleta. Y también estamos trabajando en este momento en un proyecto de micromovilidad en el centro de la ciudad, que es donde tenemos más congestionamiento. Este proyecto lo estamos trabajando con la Embajada Británica, en donde estamos proponiendo calles bus bici, calles semipeatonales, calles peatonales, pero también un sistema de bicicletas públicas y de bicitaxis electroasistidos. Ese es un proyecto en el que estamos trabajando y que probablemente después tocaremos las puertas de NADB para que nos ayuden a desarrollarlo. Y bueno, por último les quiero comentar de este otro proyecto en el que actualmente estamos trabajando con la Fundación Bloomberg Philanthropies. Bloomberg Philanthropies lanza cada año, quizá muchos de ustedes lo conocen, un concurso que se llama Global Mayor Challenge. Este año lo lanzó, invitó a todas las ciudades del mundo a compartir sus proyectos más significativos, innovadores, para que podamos salir de nuestros problemas como ciudades, pero también hacer una contribución en el cambio climático. Se inscribieron 630 ciudades del mundo, y 50 resultamos lo que ellos llaman Champion Cities, y estamos trabajando hoy con este proyecto para poder llegar a una bolsa de $1 millón y hacerlo realidad. ¿En qué consiste este proyecto? Este proyecto se basa precisamente en la necesidad que tenemos en Hermosillo de reciclar nuestros residuos sólidos. Hoy en día solo el 2% de los residuos se reciclan. Y esto no solamente es un problema de contaminación, sino que también estamos dejando atrás oportunidades que se podrían tener al utilizar estos residuos sólidos e incorporarlos en una economía circular, crear empleos verdes y mejorar la calidad de aire y de suelo. Hoy en día, pues esta es la realidad, tenemos rellenos sanitarios, solamente el 2% se recicla y tenemos una economía lineal contaminante. Nuestra propuesta es hacer un sistema de recolección de residuos reciclables por medio de una red de bicicletas electroasistidas y adaptadas, y además tripuladas por mujeres que están en condiciones de vulnerabilidad. De hecho, el primer piloto que arrancaremos en 2 semanas será con mujeres que han sufrido abusos por parte de sus parejas y que hoy necesitan sacar adelante su familia. Entonces, la idea es aquí manejar los residuos sólidos, darle trabajo a las mujeres que están en condición de vulnerabilidad y además fomentar la movilidad sustentable. De esta manera, estaríamos incorporando todas estas fases al proyecto y creando una nueva conciencia. Si París creó 5,000 nuevos empleos a raíz de la pandemia por medio de las bicicletas, ¿por qué nosotros no? Lo que yo quisiera dejar claro es que esto no es simplemente un tema de conciencia social, realmente puede ser un tema de competitividad para nuestras ciudades y abrir esa puerta a nuevas oportunidades. Y bueno, termino con este mural que recientemente apareció en la nación del Brexit, que dice "We are all in the same boat". Y realmente estamos todos en el mismo bote y lo que hagamos, los esfuerzos que hagamos en conjunto serán bien de todos. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Guadalupe, and for telling us a little bit about those projects in Hermosillo. The one thing that jumped out at me is your recognition of what I call the time tax, that traffic congestion and the lack of mobility can cause in everyday life. And I think a lot of people, certainly in the United States, but even in Mexico, are in the more congested cities are rethinking how they organize their lives because of that very phenomena, in addition to the effects on the environment. And we're part of the environment, and our time is part of that as well. So thank you. Sticking to the same theme of urban planning and how it affects transportation, mobility, and the environment, I'm going to ask Lourdes Renner to make a few comments. But before I do so, I just want to highlight a couple of her background items. She's a professor and a researcher at the Department of Urban and Environmental Studies at the COLEF, which is a university based in Tijuana. Her areas of specialization are management and policymaking for urban environment, and it's especially how it relates to the risks of water resources and climate change, planning, zoning, the zoning for ecological territories, as well as general urban planning and the use of the city resources. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lourdes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor being here. Thank you so much for inviting me for talk about mobility and urban development. Now I'm going to speak in Spanish because I can express myself better in Spanish. Justamente agradezco mucho la invitación para hablar sobre estos temas de movilidad y desarrollo urbano. Yo me centraré específicamente en la planeación, espacios públicos e inclusión social después de COVID-19, ¿no? Todo el día de hoy hemos escuchado ideas, reflexiones, pensamientos que tienen una sinergia. Todos ellos apuntan al bien común, a cómo vamos a reincorporarnos, cómo vamos a reactivarnos después del impacto que tuvimos o que estamos teniendo por la pandemia en todas las dimensiones, en lo social, en lo ambiental, en lo cultural, en lo económico, en todas las dimensiones, en todos los ámbitos. Estamos teniendo los embates de la pandemia y cómo reactivamos, cómo vamos. Aquí hay una sinergia de intereses, perdón, se me olvidó. Hay una sinergia en que buscamos el bien común a través de diferentes estrategias y de diferentes mecanismos. Yo soy una convencida, y de alguna manera lo han planteado en el día de hoy, que la planeación es un elemento clave, la planeación para la configuración y reconfiguración de nuestras ciudades, de nuestras comunidades, ¿no? A lo largo de toda la frontera y al interior de cada país, la planeación. ¿Y hacia dónde apuntamos la energía? ¿Hacia dónde? ¿Hacia qué de la planeación? Bueno, por algún lado tenemos que empezar. Con este tema de la pandemia, una de las áreas socialmente que han sido más impactadas han sido justamente las comunidades más vulnerables. Las comunidades más vulnerables que han resentido los efectos de... también sabemos que se ha impulsado mucho más el desarrollo del trabajo a distancia, lo cual mucho de esto llegó para quedarse en esta nueva reconfiguración social que tenemos. Sin embargo, cobra aquí especial importancia y se pone en el centro de la atención los espacios públicos. Los espacios públicos para volver a hacer comunidad, los espacios públicos para reintegrarnos socialmente, los espacios públicos donde podamos interactuar con otras personas, pero espacios públicos que cumplan con las características no solo en cantidad y distribución homogénea, sino en calidad al interior de los mismos. Por eso yo centro mi trabajo el día de hoy en platicar con ustedes una idea específica de cómo a través de la planeación, poniendo especial atención en movilidad y espacios públicos, podemos dirigir las estrategias de política pública a algo muy específico, que es una manera de empezar a retomar nuestras ciudades desde otra configuración, ¿no? Lo que nos ha dejado, lo que nos está dejando esta pandemia y lo que viene después. Como componentes del desarrollo urbano sabemos que son fundamentales el tema de uso de suelo, de movilidad, no solo el sistema vial, sino del transporte público al interior de las ciudades, el tema de equipamiento, yo me centraré, les decía, en espacio público, particularmente en parques, el tema de infraestructura y de servicios al interior de nuestras ciudades. Pues la conjugación o la interrelación de estos elementos de componentes del desarrollo urbano, que no es homogénea en cada ciudad, al interior de cada ciudad no está distribuida de manera homogénea la consolidación del desarrollo urbano, nos permite identificar áreas vulnerables o colonias o poblaciones más vulnerables al interior de cada ciudad. Para identificar estas vulnerabilidades sociales, particularmente de la población, para enfrentar situaciones de contingencia como la pandemia, como el COVID-19, yo he desarrollado una metodología para analizar la vulnerabilidad social a nivel intraurbano, a nivel de cada ciudad y al interior de cada ciudad. Este análisis de vulnerabilidad social está básicamente integrado por tres componentes. Uno es la población y estructura poblacional, cómo está configurada la población para enfrentar este tipo de situaciones, el acceso a recursos para enfrentar la contingencia y el acceso a empleo seguro, como los tres principales componentes. Esta información que les presento es de 2020, tomé los datos principales obviamente del INEGI, y bueno, algunos de los aspectos dentro de cada componente en población y estructura poblacional, pues hay que tomar en cuenta la densidad poblacional, la población que académicamente se considera más vulnerable, que es la menor de 5 años de edad y mayor de 65 años, la población de habla indígena, de lengua indígena, la población con limitación en la actividad o discapacidades, la población analfabeta y la población que no tiene afiliación a servicios de salud, que está carente de contar con servicios de salud. Eso es en el componente sociodemográfico. Por otro lado, tenemos el componente del acceso a recursos para enfrentar la contingencia. Específicamente, el porcentaje de viviendas con piso de tierra, el porcentaje de viviendas que no disponen de los servicios básicos como es energía, agua potable, drenaje, el porcentaje de viviendas que no disponen de tecnologías de información o de comunicación y que no disponen de un vehículo para transportarse. Finalmente, el acceso a empleo seguro, que es la población de 12 años y más inactiva o no ocupada. Bueno, la expresión territorial de esta vulnerabilidad, disculpen que los mapas sean tan pequeños, pero quise aprovechar mis 10 minutos. Solamente quiero mostrar, ahí se alcanza a ver, en este primer mapa, esta es la mancha urbana, es la superficie urbana de Ciudad Juárez. Aquí podemos, en los colores más oscuros, ver dónde se concentran las mayores densidades poblacionales, que es uno de los elementos de vulnerabilidad si no se cuenta con el resto de servicios, equipamiento e infraestructura. También en esta expresión territorial vemos el segundo mapa, que se refiere a la población que sociodemográficamente hablando tiene mayores limitaciones. Decíamos donde se concentra la población que tiene más cantidad de población menor de 5 años, mayor de 65, sin afiliación a servicios de salud, etc. En el tercer mapa vemos la población que tiene dificultades para acceder a recursos en momentos de contingencia. Igual, la concentración de todos estos, también lo del empleo, se concentra en el norponiente de nuestra superficie urbana, de nuestra ciudad, de Ciudad Juárez, y la parte suroriente principalmente, ¿sí? Con datos comprobados. Y entonces, el análisis interrelacionado de estos componentes nos permite ver de manera muy clara cómo se distribuye la vulnerabilidad social en Ciudad Juárez. Y esto no es exclusivo de esta ciudad fronteriza, sino es una problemática compartida con otras ciudades de la frontera. Si se hace este tipo de análisis, podemos perfectamente identificar de manera clara y rápida a dónde dirigir las estrategias de política pública, ¿sí? Hacia qué áreas a nivel de nuestras ciudades, a nivel intraurbano, es necesario implementar políticas, estrategias y acciones de política pública. Ahí está claramente expresado. Ahora, si yo hago un análisis relacionado de esta vulnerabilidad social con los parques de Ciudad Juárez, dije que me iba a concentrar en este tipo de equipamiento en el espacio público. Si los parques, y ustedes dirán, es que no se alcanza a ver, el mapa es muy pequeño, es que lamentablemente tenemos parques atomizados. Tenemos parques que están fragmentados, que están y concentrados en la parte oriente de la mancha urbana. La parte poniente, que ya identificamos de alta vulnerabilidad social, prácticamente carece de este tipo de espacio público, ¿sí? Y los que existen en el oriente son la mayoría muy pequeños, fragmentados y no son de buena calidad. Entonces, si hacemos un análisis relacionado entre vulnerabilidad social y la accesibilidad a este tipo de espacios, bueno, ahí ya vemos claramente los déficits y hacia dónde tenemos que apuntar. Y entonces dice uno, bueno, con un buen sistema de movilidad podríamos pensar que todo mundo podría acceder a los pocos parques que están en mejores condiciones y que son muy grandes. Bueno, aquí está el sistema de movilidad tradicional, transporte urbano, son las líneas más claras que resalté. Tenemos un transporte urbano obsoleto, que es demasiado antiguo, que se ha concentrado principalmente en la parte norponiente, pero para trasladar a la población a los parques industriales, o sea, básicamente centros de trabajo, pero fuera y lejos del acceso a los espacios públicos, que lo hemos leído seguramente muchísimo y en muchas publicaciones y en muchas notas periodísticas. El espacio público se convierte en un actor clave en los momentos de nuestra reconfiguración después del COVID y durante el COVID, ¿no? No me detendré en la explicación para ello, pero sabemos bien por qué. Ahora, si hacemos un análisis interrelacionado, perdón, si se me va el apuntador y los apunto ustedes, es que no le atino. Si hacemos un análisis integrado entre vulnerabilidad social, parques, su accesibilidad y el sistema integrado de transporte que se está implementando al día de hoy en Juárez, donde ya se tiene una primera ruta troncal que es esta en gris y se está desarrollando una segunda ruta troncal y algunas pretroncales, no está todavía totalmente cubierto ni previsto que se cubra de manera satisfactoria la accesibilidad a este tipo de espacios por todas las poblaciones, mucho menos por la población más vulnerable. Y estamos hablando de un tema de inclusión. Entonces, básicamente yo quería mostrarles con este ejercicio analítico cómo de manera clara podemos apuntar a través de la planeación de la movilidad y el espacio público a una estrategia de política pública a nivel intraurbana específica que puede ser compartida por todas las ciudades de nuestra frontera. Muchas gracias por su atención. Gracias.
Gracias, Lourdes. What I found interesting out of your presentation was that research and the data is available.
Yes.
And what we need to do is distill and understand it so we can actually connect the infrastructure, the people, and the environment that they need to thrive. And thank you. And thank you very much for sharing that. Our next panelist is Dr. Stephen Roop. He is a CEO of Freight Shuttle Express. And he is actually involved in, if you will, in trying to figure out how to improve mobility through technology and connecting goods with from their suppliers to their buyers in a way that improves the overall environment, reduces the time tax due to congestion, and reduces the air quality emissions that can help that affect the livelihoods of everybody who is impacted in our border region, where transportation is such a large component of the economic and social fabric. Before that, though, he brought 30 years of experience in freight transportation systems and operations, and I know you took advantage of the opportunity of several grant fundings as a rail operator to help devise FSX. So thank you very much.
I've been sitting here trying to think of what I wanted to tell this group after listening to so many fascinating discussions about binational trade and about the environmental challenges and the employment and the quality of life challenges. I've got way too many layers of the onion to peel back here. We could talk about the technology, which has been designed and demonstrated at our test facility in Bryan, Texas, Bryan College Station. We could talk about the statutory or regulatory issues that we have faced and that we have overcome. The commercial portion of this is about giving shippers a lower cost and a more reliable way to get cargo across the border, because how many times have we heard today that Mexico and U.S. are the biggest trading partners, and that commerce is the key to economic growth and health. So how you solve that problem in today's environment, it was part of the impetus behind the freight shuttle. We've got operational issues, and then the financing of a system like this comes to mind. How do you pay for this? So we began evaluating all of these factors. I'm embarrassed to say 10 or 15 years ago. This is not an overnight effort here, but it is ready for deployment, and we're working intensely with stakeholders in El Paso and Juarez to build essentially a system that operates like a rolling conveyor between terminals that are set back away from the border and operate on its own infrastructure. We could talk about the technology, but I think that maybe is left for another time. This is a hybrid system, steel wheels. It's an electric linear induction system, which means it has no emissions, and it's got no moving parts. So this vehicle that has been prototyped doesn't have any moving parts. It's a passive propulsion system, and we did that for both economic reasons and maintainability reasons. Our secret sauce in this proposition is that we have such a low-cost vehicle that we can afford to finance, design, build, and operate our own infrastructure elevated above the highway system between a secure terminal in Mexico and a sister facility in the U.S., and move cargo across the border in a pre-cleared and nonstop fashion. The green on the right-hand side shows our margin. We're operating at about 10 cents a mile in electricity. We take the driver out of the equation, and as a result, we have a huge margin with which to finance and pay for our infrastructure and create a return for investors. And here's another part of the story that I've got to get out today is this system is privately financeable. So the private sector can build it, operate it, and make a return on investment, and that alleviates the public sector, who has way too many things to spend money on in the transportation arena as elsewhere, and operate this as a sustainable commercial enterprise. I don't know that I can make this video work from this, but this is a picture of our test site. I encourage you to go to freightshuttle.com and see some videos and see some visualizations. This is our first full-scale working prototype. I'm afraid I'll mess it up. Oh, look at that. So this is at our test facility. This vehicle is all aluminum, and you're going to see our unique loading and unloading capability, which is a rotating cargo bay that allows an 18-wheeler to drive across that cargo bay, set the trailer in place, disconnect. We've got an automatic fifth wheel that deploys and secures the trailer on board, and then it can move across the border nonstop on its own elevated guideway. We've done some tests at our test facility, and we can do that exchange in 5 minutes, which gives us a throughput capacity at our terminals and allows us to determine how many of these loading lanes we need and how many acres or hectares we need in our facilities to move a certain amount of cargo. El Paso Juarez has about, pre-pandemic, had about 2,500 shipments a day in each direction. And we would like to carry a good portion of that, certainly not all of it. This is not intended to be a monopoly. It's intended to be an option for shippers. This is what the cross-border system looks like conceptually. 2 secure facilities, You can decide how far apart they are. That's a pragmatic and an economic question. We're looking at 5 to 10 miles. And we can then scan, because this is an automated system, we take the driver out of the equation, we take the tractor out of the equation, and from customs perspective, we've eliminated 2/3 of the security vulnerability. So their incredibly difficult mission of elevating trade and security simultaneously is made possible with a system like this through 100% scanning, pre-clearance, and then operating on what customs calls a sterile corridor. And by that, they mean once it's headed to its trading partner country, it cannot be diverted, it cannot be stopped, it can't be taken off the guideway, and it will arrive at its destination intact and secure. This might work too. There we go. This is based on engineering designs. This is not a cartoon. This is our actual vehicle rendered in a 3D visualization. And this is how we exchange cargo in a very small beginning terminal. This is modular, and we can increase this from 3 transfer lanes to 30 if we need to. And the vehicles are choreographed, and up in the upper right, you see them going through a radiation portal. And that information is sent real time to customs to take a look at the X-ray and to pass the vehicle along to a location that we'll build in the system that allows customs to divert any shipment they wish to look at more closely, to extract the trailer, set it on the ground, and all the rest of the cargo moves to its destination. So with a CTPAT population as our basic customer base, 98% of the cargo ought to move across the border unimpeded, nonstop. The facilities can be expanded to be quite large, and the ancillary activities around a facility like this can include warehousing, value-added services. And you can't quite see it in this particular view, but there's a double stack intermodal train on the border of this facility where we are able to load and unload double stack rail in a very efficient, cost-effective fashion. We're compatible with highways, and we have, in the US, we've been designated as an augmentation of the national highway system and encouraged statutorily and from a regulatory standpoint to build these elevated structures in existing highway right-of-way. How's my time?
Oh, fine.
Okay.
You got 2 minutes.
Okay. This is a view of a facility like a very large commercial customer like Electrolux, for instance, in Juarez, or Walmart or HEB in San Antonio, where they actually have enough volume that they can build a branch line into their own facility and affect trade very economically on their own footprint. And this is how, under the right circumstances, we can navigate a very complicated interchange